All right. Well, it is 6 o'clock. I know it's been a long day, so I just want to say hello and thank you all so much for being here for the final session of the day and the conference. What a fantastic 2 days we've had. My name is Stephanie, and I'm an assistant professor of psychology at the University of Virginia and a Tide affiliate, and I will be moderating our panel today. I have no conflicts of interest to disclose. We are so lucky to have with us today four super impressive young people, Haven, Bhavika, Maya, and Ava, for our Youth Voices panel. These young people participated in Tide's first ever hackathon last spring, which Ava helped organize and did a beautiful job for. Over the course of one very long day, they worked in small groups to design and pitch a digital mental health app that could be used to either reduce the tendency to make negative social comparisons on social media or to help people make positive social connections online. I was fortunate to be present at this hackathon despite being 9 months pregnant and can attest that these designs were incredibly thoughtful, creative, fun, and effective. It really reinforced to us the importance of centering teens and young adults' voices as we think about how to manage social media and how to build digital solutions that will work for teens. And centering young people's voices in all stages of the work that we do is of paramount importance to Tide, which is why we're all here right now. The young people on this panel represent winning teams from the hackathon and are here to discuss how to best design digital mental health tools for teens. I will now ask each of them to briefly introduce themselves and perhaps briefly describe the idea they pitched at the hackathon. As a reminder, the session is being recorded for educational purposes only. Okay, so first up, I will pass it to Haven. Will you please introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Haven. I just graduated high school, so I'm 18. My group's main idea at the hackathon was to prioritize thinking about adding an extension onto apps that people already use rather than creating new ones that would help you filter out a lot of the things that you were seeing to reduce possible triggers or just simply things that you don't want to be exposed to on a day-to-day basis.
Fantastic. Thank you. Bhavika.
Hi, my name is Bhavika. Oh, sorry. My name is Bhavika, and I'm a rising senior. My prototype was called Growth Garden, and essentially it was an extension that you can download, and it provides more awareness to teens that face negative self-comparison. So if they scroll through content that brings up those feelings, the app will like prompt a reflection question and ask the users to kind of rate how they feel after viewing that content. So it's very focused on reflection. And why it's called Growth Garden is because after a lot of reflection, you can kind of see your garden build up. So, and you can click on every flower and see like, oh, from the past, how have you overcome like the feelings before? So it's kind of like a really reflection centered intervention.
Fantastic. Thank you. Maya.
Hi, I'm Maya. I am a rising third year at the University of Virginia, and I'm representing the Psychology CIO LumiLink. And our intervention the name is pending, but it was supposed to be a dual intervention to target both negative social comparisons as well as increase reflection through a cognitive behavioral based training so that you can have increased self-awareness and also have that more gamified version of connecting with other people and having those connections be based on something more grounded.
Awesome. Now I'll ask Ava to introduce herself and summarize some key features of the hackathon presentations.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Steph, for contextualizing all of this for us. I'm Ava. I'm a rising fourth year at the University of Virginia. And as you mentioned, I helped organize the hackathon. With the organizational team's help, the hackathon truly exceeded my expectations with its wonderful insights, which is why I'm really excited to talk about the themes and the interventions that the participants made. First, I want to talk about the structure of many of the hackathon interventions. We challenged participants to just build a digital intervention that addressed one of the two problem areas of negative social comparison or social disconnection online, but we didn't specify what type of intervention that would be, which that form of instruction makes it especially interesting to me that the majority of participants built social media based interventions where they created new social media platforms to suit their interests in addressing the problem areas. We also had 3 interventions that took a novel approach that Haven and Bavika mentioned, where they built an app extension that connected to existing social media like TikTok to do things like moderate content and ensure that users are exposed to less triggering and more beneficial content. I like to call this the assistant to the algorithm feature. Regardless of what type of intervention participants built, there were emerging themes that I think were mentioned, like gamification. A lot of the apps included gamified elements to keep people engaged, like encouraging people to play wellness games or meet friends in person rather than relying on online connections solely. By having them redeem points by doing these things, and then they could then use the points to have rewards or privileges in the apps. For example, Growth Garden, like Viveka mentioned, did this by allowing users to grow a virtual garden through their accomplishments on the app. Another resounding theme was the importance of customization. Nearly every group had some sort of mechanism to customize the intervention experience precisely to users' identities, interests, and general preferences like app appearance. Next, participants really wanted to take control of their feeds. I believe this was much of the incentive for building whole new social media platforms from the ground up, as many of the interventions did. They wanted to reduce triggering content by counteracting it with positive content or using mechanisms like the the algorithm feature to modify their experience on existing social media platforms. Lastly, the hackathon participants really wanted to break the automaticity that comes with using social media, where people just end up scrolling and scrolling, and then they forget like what day it is and their own name. Um, so, and they did this by encouraging self-reflection through their features. For example, some of the apps had journaling features, and others wanted to make sure that users were aware of their scrolling habits and progress while using the intervention by giving them weekly recaps of what they accomplished on the app. So, and we plan to do a more in-depth analysis of the qualitative analysis of the results, but that's like a preliminary overview.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ava. Such a thorough interview. And we are just so fortunate to have all of you here. Tyler posted in the chat, really liking the idea of integrating interventions into apps that you've already used. And I really liked how you highlighted that piece. So I want to start. I have a few questions prepared for our panelists, and then I will also save some time to take questions from the audience. So audience members, if you could use the Q&A function or the chat function to post your questions, and I can review them and integrate them into the questions. But first, I want to start off with thinking about all these features that Ava was just talking about, right? The customization, personalization, the integration into existing systems, the gamification aspects, or others that we haven't discussed yet. What would make you, as a young person, most interested in trying a digital mental health program? And Maya, how about I start with you on this? But everyone feel free to jump in.
So I believe that if you're targeting a certain audience that wants to use this mental health program, there's already that incentive of, oh, what I'm using now isn't working for me. And so I think something that would draw participants and other social media users to use these apps are something that seems seamless and not out of place. At the hackathon, one of the ideas that kept bouncing around were that people, especially the teens, they don't want to be seen using an app that is meant to, they called it like baby social media. That's something that really made them wary to use these certain interventions. So I think something that's a lot more seamless and user friendly, I think that those are the more important things that would make somebody want to use these kinds of programs.
Great. And you mentioned some ideas, but I'm curious if you or others have any thoughts on what makes these kinds of programs most user-friendly.
Sorry, do you want me to give an idea?
Sure. Or anyone else is free to jump in.
One idea that my team came up with for making it more user friendly is that, like Ava had already said in her summary, is that starting from scratch, where you can make new friends based off of interests that you yourself are putting out into the world. So instead of just jumping in headfirst and there's already people that have popularity, which could be kind of intimidating, you're just starting off from scratch on a blank slate. And I think that is probably one of the easier ways to go about it.
Great. Thank you. Would any of our other panelists like to comment on this question?
I would love to.
Thanks, Evan.
So I think there are two main reasons why a teen themselves might feel motivated to actually download and use on a daily basis a digital mental health program. I think the first one is it's not a good feeling to feel addicted to your screens or unmotivated, lazy, like you have nothing else to do. I think a lot of the time people just don't really know how to manage that. So I think having something that would reduce it being such a kind of unconscious thing and just make you think a little bit more, but it's not necessarily controlling, would be really helpful for people. And then the second reason is I think a lot of the time people may notice or may not that they feel worse about an aspect of themselves or their lives after using social media. So I think an app where they can, like Bavika's group's idea, where they can reflect on it, or my group's idea, where they can directly filter out the content from being seen in the first place, is a really helpful way to just be more intentional about your intake and the impact it's having on you.
Thanks, Haven. So it sounds like apps that can help you bring awareness to how you're using digital technology and social media, as
Right.
well as the emotional impact then of your use.
Yeah, and I think it is definitely something that teens would be more interested in just because they're controlling the app itself. Like they're saying what they want to be filtered out. So it's not really something controlling them or controlling their intake.
So giving youth agency in these apps and not making it seem like they're being controlled by the apps.
Right.
Yeah, that
Mhm.
seems super important. Thank you. Bavika or Ava, would you like to comment on this question?
Yeah, I was just gonna jump off her point and say a big thing I've noticed is customization is really important for teenagers. And I think, I mean, not just in like in apps, but also think about teenagers spend a lot of time customizing their phone wallpapers, their app icons, the little things. So it kind of shows how customization is really important to teenagers. And I also, me personally, I like apps that are visually appealing and easy to navigate. Um, that's what a lot of modern day apps tend to use, you know, like easier color schemes and just it's like aesthetically pleasing. And again, like also kind of having accountability through something like gamification, like streaks, and also being able to like again reflect on what you've done previously. So if you think of like something like color by number, you start off with a blank canvas and you go one by one. You start off with one color, then you go to the next. At first, it seems like a blank canvas with random dots everywhere. But when you fill up the canvas, it kind of shows your progress and it makes you more motivated. That's something that like drove me and my team to pursue that feature specifically in Growth Garden about how like think about like okay maybe 1 to 2 flowers isn't the most like coolest thing, but when you see like a whole bunch of flowers, it kind of shows you like your growth and reflection is really important in that. So yeah.
Yeah, that's excellent. So thinking about incorporating kind of a rewarding aspect where you can monitor your growth and keeps you motivated, but also this visual, appealing and gamification. Yeah, super interesting. I'm curious what you all think, thinking about this like agency and control piece. would you prefer apps where you can kind of log in at any time and use them, or apps that give you more of like a notification, right? It's time to use the app. And if so, how would you like that notification to be delivered?
So I can say one thing that's sort of neither of those, which is widgets on a screen. It's more similar to a notification, but it's kind of something that stays on your lock screen. And so you can see your progress at any time, but it can also, like every time you open your phone, it might have a different update on it, or it might say something else. Or you might have almost a battery that's running out and you don't want to let that go. So it's kind of it's constantly there throughout your day, but you can check it every time you see something. I think that a lot of people tend to like things like that, and I've seen them becoming more popular.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So it gives you continuous kind of updates on your
Yeah, it's
process.
something, it's like a notification that is, it's cute and aesthetic and it stays on your lock screen. So it can kind of like always be changing. So you can be keeping track of maybe one of those visual aspects of the app.
I hope there are some engineers in our crowd today who can make all of this happen. This is all so fascinating. Thank you. Ava, would you like to comment on what might make you interested in trying a digital mental health platform?
Sure. Well, I guess to keep it on the topic of notifications and engagement after you've already joined the platform. Personally, I really value like credibility of a platform in terms of like being based in research. So I would probably be most likely to consistently use something if I was recommended it by my clinician or someone to that effect. But then once you're there, I think uh, widgets are a great way to get people to continue to be engaged because it can get back at the gamification, which is over and over again proved to be one of the best ways to keep users engaged because it's not bombarding you with a notification, which can be bothersome. It is just showing you your progress passively, and then you can choose to look at it if you want. And then to speak to the customization piece, I think the best way to keep Ava personally engaged, because that's really the only perspective I can objectively speak to, um, is to probably have like rare notifications, maybe only when a gamified element like a streak of using the app is going to be extinguished, and also like a widget that is customized to your taste and matches the aesthetic of your phone.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I think you all spoke really well to this. I started with what would make you interested in trying an app. Another one of my questions was what would make you keep using the app? Because we know that, many teens will download an app and use it maybe one or two times. But what would make you keep coming back? And I think you all spoke to what would keep you engaged, but I just want to give you a chance if there's anything that you didn't say that you would like to kind of speak to on what might keep you engaged when you're using an app.
I can speak to this one. I think the number one thing that I've seen that keeps people, mostly teenagers, wanting to do things is if it's popular. And I think one way to increase that connection is through having ways to share your progress and make the app itself, or the idea at least, almost trendy. And one way that we talked about this, I know at the hackathon, was through there's something called Spotify Wrapped, where you can send your updated like music you listen to that month. So a similar thing of like an update that you could share online, and when people see that, they want to download it too, and it keeps people going because a lot of people are doing it.
Yeah, there was a very well-timed comment in the chat about peer-to-peer motivation that I think you just answered really beautifully. Thank you, Haven.
Of course.
Anyone else want to speak to what might keep you engaged? I think that popularity piece is really key. Go ahead, Eva.
Yeah, I can speak to this. I think also the idea with the assistant algorithm features where it seamlessly integrates into a platform that is already popular and widely used. I think that can be very valuable because let's be honest, like most of the people in this room are researchers and they're caked in academia, and we're not really like entrepreneurs making like products that are going to be used widely, like Instagram or TikTok, and those are usually like extremely well established. And to get back to a point Maya was talking about with the baby social media platforms, I think two of our interventions kind of took on the idea of the hackathon interventions, took on the idea of making a pre big social media platform for younger teens to use to get used to some of the more tumultuous elements of social media in a safer environment. I think that was an idea that was thrown around, and then some people were like, well, if it's not widely used or accepted by my peer group, then I probably won't want to use it. But if we focus on instead, for example, putting an extension on Instagram that tells you when a video might be triggering to your tendency to uh, do negative social comparison, then I think that might be something that might be used more enduringly, because it's just going to be there whenever you open social media, and it's just going to make you more aware and break that automaticity of using social media. So that's an alternative option if you can't get an intervention to be very popular among a youth base.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Anyone else want to comment on this? These are just, I feel like I'm going to need a whole week to like process all of this. I'm so glad we're recording these sessions. Really, really helpful information. I'm curious, kind of getting more into mental health related apps, right? What do you think current apps are doing or kind of getting right about supporting youth with anxiety, depression, or eating concerns? And where do you think they're really missing the mark? Haven, can I start with you on this one?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have used a couple apps. I honestly don't really even remember their names. I think the reason being is that you kind of use things for a couple of days and then it's an app that just falls behind in your phone. It's not an automatic when you're opening. None of them were really goal centered. I wasn't progressing on them. I was more logging on and just kind of seeing the same, maybe like motivational quotes over and over again, or like just little things like that. And it's just not something that you feel motivated to return to or even would remember to return to necessarily. So I think the good thing about it is some of them were more like, um, I guess the word would kind of be like calming. It was like a calming space, but it wasn't motivational or goal oriented, or, memorable in a way that I would want to continue to return.
Can you speak when you say like a calming space? Are there certain
Yeah.
features that help make for a calming space?
I think a lot of the apps were, I mean, not only like visually would they be kind of like pastel and there would just be kind of cute little icons, but it would also they would try to ask you like reflective questions, or I had an app that there were different tabs at the bottom where you could do different things, and one of them was like a little game you could play. The other one were just cute little quotes. So it's kind of just, I guess, simple and not chaotic like a big Instagram or TikTok would be.
Great. So thinking about like color, format, and design there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Maya, Bhavika, Ava, anyone want to comment on what you think that current apps are getting right and maybe not doing so well?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So I think that journaling is pretty useful, and I think it's pretty important. At least, like again, like reflection is like a common theme that we're repeating here, that it's like important because like the only way to truly grow or evolve from a negative state is to reflect and to make sure that what you're doing, like, or bring awareness basically, right? So I use this app. It's called How We Feel. So previously, this app was recommended to me by a friend. So I was gonna say like the biggest way, like other than social media and people promoting it, is maybe like hearing it from a friend. Because if a friend uses it and they say it's a really nice app, then I guess you're more likely to use it if someone recommends it to you. So when I got this app previously, there wasn't any like AI features on it or anything. So it would just be kind of like there's like a range of emotions you can choose from. You pick one that you feel, and like the thing about this app is like you can name your emotions more specifically. So instead of just happy, maybe you could say like or sorry, instead of like sad, you can say stressed specifically, and then you can write a few words about how or why you feel that way, and then over time you can see again kind of the progress, or like, oh, this week was a more sad or blue week than yellow, which is happy. And then recently they integrated AI features which allows you to like go deeper into the reflection questions. So you type whatever you want. Most apps have this. I know like Apple currently has like a mindfulness app that lets you write about how you feel, but How We Feel, specifically this app, integrated AI pretty well in a way that I actually liked it, where you type something and then you have an option. You can reflect on it if you want, and the AI will ask you a question that prompts you to write more, and as much as you want, and then you can like finish your journal there. And then they also integrated AI in another way, which is weekly reflections. And you can generate a new one if you don't like the one that you have currently, but usually it's pretty good, right? And it's honestly, me personally, it's very fun to see the weekly reflections and get reminded of like the sad and happy times. So that's the specific app that I use personally, but overall.
Yeah, that's great. So it seems like the option to reflect can be really powerful. And it also seems like that agency piece comes up here too, right? I can choose whether I want to, do more or not. Great, thank you. Maya or Ava?
Yeah,
Maya.
I had a few comments that were floating through my mind while hearing everyone's wonderful responses. And to go off of the comment about how the apps that are most effective seem to be very aesthetically pleasing. I found that the apps that I've used that I really love going back to, not only are they aesthetically pleasing, but I feel an immediate relief from my negative symptoms. For example, meditative apps that will incorporate music or like a guided meditation. Those ones, to me, after I'm done with a session, I immediately feel a lot lighter and I feel happier. And I think that's something that these apps do very well. You have that instant gratification that can almost be analogous to having a like on a social media post that one would create. The only issue I have is I think these apps can be a barrier to a lot of demographics. Usually, these apps require you to pay for an expensive subscription, and I think this is marginalizing a group of people that could benefit from these apps the most. Because the apps that are kind of conducive to negative social comparisons, they're free, and then the ones that are helpful towards your mental well-being, they were at $200 a year, and that's just not that's just creating barriers.
Yeah, that's a really important point. Thank you for raising that. I'm going to start integrating some of the great questions that are coming up in the chat, and I agree. I think we could stay here for the next 2 hours. But I'm curious, you're raising things like meditation and, emotion identification. I'm curious whether you all have a preference for, practicing using these kind of digital mental health apps versus, practicing these skills and learning these skills in more kind of traditional face-to-face settings, like in a therapist's or doctor's office. Anyone like to kind of speak to that?
I can speak to it a little bit. I did go to therapy for a few years and talked a little bit about how to better manage it. And a lot of the advice I received was to download apps that would help me. So I think it is definitely good to talk about things with people in the sense that you are, destigmatizing things. But I think that it's so good to have an app just because it's always with you and it's something that you can go to in private, because a lot of the time, I think when we're in negative headspaces, we want to keep it to ourselves. So it's great to have the option to talk with people and gain strategies, but a lot of people, especially teenagers, are not going to be advocating for themselves to go to therapy or talk to a professional about it. So it's good to always have this as an option that you can carry with you and you can keep private.
Yeah, I really appreciate that perspective. Thanks, Haven. For the sake of time, I'm going to move us a little bit in the same kind of domain. What are some things that you think older generations, many of us who are designing and kind of developing and building these digital mental health apps, are not really understanding about being a teenager at this time and should be understanding as we continue to develop these apps for teens? Viveka, why don't I start with you, if that's okay?
Yeah, could you repeat the question if you don't mind?
Absolutely. So what are some things you think that older generations and many of us who are actually developing and building these digital mental health apps aren't quite getting about what it's like to be a teenager these days and really should be getting so that we can design the best apps?
Yeah, I feel like while you develop the app, of course, it's important. I feel like it's really important to integrate like teen perspectives as well. So like with like Growth Garden and the other interventions, there's like a youth advisory board where the youth also gets to like comment on the iterations of the app, like which is up yet to come, but that's their plan. And I like that idea a lot because I feel like, I mean, how else are you supposed to make an app effective if you don't take in current and actionable feedback from teenagers currently? I can't think of specific things right now, but I feel like while developing an app, you should definitely have like a teenager perspective or multiple people's perspective while developing an app.
Well, I think that that is so important, right? Because we can't know what it's like to be a teen all the time, right? Even if we talk to teens. So having that ongoing communication directly with teens when we're designing and developing and building and implementing these apps is so important. Thank you. Would anyone else like to comment on that? What should we know about what it's like to be a teenager today to build the best apps for you?
I think another thing that as researchers and developers that we should keep in mind is that social media has truly transformed into something that's a lot more rapid than it used to be. And a lot of that can be tied down to the algorithm and fast moving trends. And I think capitalizing on the fact that trends that are quick can be a great way to grab the attentions of youth is also very difficult because the trends by nature will recycle out, and then it can be very difficult to establish something that's very long term. I think keeping this in mind is really important. I think it also speaks to the fact that attention spans might be a little bit shorter. I don't think there's conclusive evidence so far, but it seems to be that um, anecdotally, people believe that attention spans are shorter. And I think keeping that in mind is also important.
Yeah, thank you. Even or Ava, would you like to comment?
Yeah, sure. I guess like something I would say is I think people aren't aware if we're talking about social media and its dynamic with teen mental health. Older generations may not be aware how pervasive social media is to teens' lives. Like I think we are developing with our phones as a kind of like cyborg Donna Haraway style extension of ourselves, like um, during adolescence at this point. And the other thing about social media to keep in mind is that it is so highly personalized, which is one of the things that we keep hearing is like a huge incentive for using an app and mental health interventions in general. I think that's what keeps people engaged, and that's what has a death grip on our youth today. And because it's so personalized, I think it really becomes an extension something that can exacerbate your current problems. So I think the problems that people will face on social media, teens will face on social media, will be highly dependent on their demographic, especially gender. So I think taking a look at the issue of teen mental health, and when asking teens about um, their mental health and social media or their ideas on interventions, to specifically ask about how their identities interact with these things, I think that will be especially important because my feed will look completely different than Maya's or Bavika's or Haven's or anyone, and especially way more different than like a comparable male who's our age, you know?
Yeah, these are such important points. Thank you, Ava. And I think it again brings me back to the importance of making sure that teens have a seat at the table while we're doing all this work, right? Because what I'm seeing on my feed that might influence the way that I design an app is certainly not going to be what any of you in this, in this panel discussion are seeing. And that's so important to remember. Great. So I'm gonna switch us a little bit. We have about 10 minutes left, and it's hard to think about youth mental health apps without thinking about the role of parents and other adults. And I really like this question from Thumbi in the chat. So a question that comes up a lot with youth mental health apps is parental access and engagement. What kind of access do you think young people would be comfortable with? And do you see any way that parent-teen interaction can be facilitated through these kinds of apps? But why don't I start with you if you're okay with that?
Sure. Um, but I will say this is definitely something to ruminate on because it really depends on the intervention. Like, for example, if it's its own social media platform, um, and you're having private conversations with people, I don't think that's something that should ever be open to parents, because, you know, people have sensitive information in there. It could, it really matters so much on a case to case basis. I think what may be best is not to integrate any sort of transparency between the digital world of teens and parents necessarily, but to focus on encouraging conversations between teens and parents on, well, how does social media make you feel? Like, are there any stressors on there? Do you find that it kind of makes any existing problems that you have worse? And just watching their teens' behavior and asking questions on how their mental health may interact with social media. I know Common Sense Media has some great resources on conversation starters between parents and teens. But I think it's best to like cultivate a relationship of trust with your teen and then be able to voluntarily get any information out of them that they may be able and check in with them, you know, because like we really get stuck in our own worlds. Like social media is a huge form of escapism. It's a whole different universe. And I think it's difficult to reconcile the virtual world with the real world. And I think if we start those conversations and we can get these worlds to intersect a bit more, then that's the best way to have parent teen interactions be facilitated. In person, warm interactions.
Great. And I know there's been some different talks during this conference about how to have those conversations. So really appreciate people doing so much great work in this space. Thank you, Ava. Haven, Bavika, or Maya, would you like to? I see Haven nodding. Great.
Yeah, I would love to add to that. So I think the main thing is there's a certain level of miscommunication. I think that a lot of the time, adults or parents are seeing kids' addiction to social media as they're always feeling positive going on it, so they want to escape into that world, which can be true. But I think a lot of the time, the reason why people are having mental health issues on it is because they're addicted to it because it continues to make them feel negative sometimes, but they want to know always what's going on in a social world, or they want to always be keeping up to date, obsessively checking things that might be harmful, but it becomes addicting. and you feel like you're missing out or you're doing something wrong or something like that if you can't check it. And so then they misunderstand parents and feel like they're just coming into control and that taking this away is going to fix them. But it feels like that being taken away is taking away, it's a loss and it's kind of out of fear. So I completely agree. I think conversations are really helpful, but I think the best way for parents to approach it is to come out of concern of how it might be affecting them rather than getting angry at the screen time itself. I think that controlling like an hour to 30 minutes is not really going to change the kid's mental health and can sometimes make it worse. So I think it's really important more to talk with your kid and encourage them to develop healthier habits or think more intentionally about what they're doing so that naturally they would less obsessively be checking those things in the first place.
Yeah, I think that's so important and so thoughtful. Thank you. I'm curious what you would all think about the apps themselves helping to facilitate some of these conversations, or would you prefer those to happen kind of independently of the apps that you're using?
I know there are some apps that, and this is usually for friends, not with parents, but there's a kind of less pressured way of communication where you can simply update a status. Um, and I think if people can take the load off of those conversations a little bit, that might be helpful for some families where they can see each other's status on an app and both would do it. So it's kind of an equal relationship and you can kind of update how you're feeling that day. Maybe you can choose whether or not you share screen time or what apps you've been on that day, or just leave little notes for each other. I think that just takes a lot of the load off of it, and you're kind of choosing what to share with each other a little bit.
Great, thank you. All right, we have a couple more minutes. I'm gonna end with one more question that comes from the chat. So in the hackathon, you were all really focused on developing apps that either targeted this tendency towards making negative social comparisons or kind of improving positive social connections online. Are there other, kind of targets that you think we could be building these digital mental health apps to address, or other kind of aspects of daily life that you think a mental health app would be helpful for? I'll turn it to you, but if you're still thinking, I can go to someone else.
Yeah, I'm still thinking. This is definitely a really good question to kind of let simmer.
Hard to do it with a couple minutes left. Anyone have any thoughts on that?
I think the only thing that it's missing is it does positive interactions online, negative interactions online, but it would be great to also add like how can we use social media and use these apps to encourage more positive relationships in person or connections in person. I think you can use social media to do that. Um,
Yeah, that's a great point. How can we use the digital mental health apps to improve our functioning outside of the social media or online space? That's great. Thank you.
I just want to say that was definitely a feature that I saw integrated into hackathon interventions multiple times, where they'll have some sort of incentive for you to log that you've been having in-person interactions. And I think that's really important. But to get at the original question of like what other issues interventions like this could target, I think I would again like to echo the point of like customization and personalization. I think algorithms are so good at customizing content because they collect a ungodly amount of data on their users, which is why like if I go to pick up my boyfriend's phone to scroll on Instagram, I will be completely uninterested in the amount of fighting content he has. And if he picks up mine, he's not going to be interested in like all of the Farsi recipes that I have on there. Um, and those are the things that keep people engaged in the apps. And similarly for mental health, we all are our own individual people and we have our own individual struggles. Something else that was really important to the hackathon interventions was initial surveys to customize the experience. So I feel like there could be like a broader intervention or many smaller interventions that either focus on an issue or have the capability to address many issues like anxiety or just irrational thought patterns. And then you can choose what issues you want to address. And like transparently, it can tell you what type of theories and therapies that the application or intervention is using. And then you can also choose what type of interventions are working for you.
That's great. I love that. Thank you so much. I know we're at time. I just saw Emma's comment in the chat. Could we host events like this in school with a panel discussion for parents to hear the youth perspective? We actually did host similar panels and discussions last year at our Youth Next conference with teens and policymakers and educators and parents. And so I hope that, with support from Tide, we can definitely continue these discussions because I think they're so important and so meaningful. And I just want to thank our panel discussants. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your time with us and your super valuable thoughts. I hope that we can continue this conversation moving forward. And I hope everyone has a lovely night. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Future is so bright.